16. Anakah Olsen. An informal vendor named Norma Garcia has been told by law enforcement in Lee County, Florida, that selling things in the street is prohibited. During the summer of 2023, sheriff's deputies arrested her in Bonita Springs for continuing to hawk her wares in places where she was specifically told not to. During the conversation, 24-year-old Anakah Olsen stopped her car in the road and tried handing Garcia $20. She sympathized with Garcia's need for money and wanted to brighten the woman's day, but the police considered the gesture an act of giving money to panhandlers, and panhandling is against the law in Florida. Olsen allegedly refused a deputy's order to move her vehicle off the road and was charged with refusing to comply with police, resisting an officer without violence, and interfering in the public right-of-way. Deputies accused the young woman of interfering with Garcia's arrest and creating a safety hazard for other drivers, herself, Garcia, and law enforcement. Olsen told NBC2 that she didn't know panhandling was illegal. She also claimed that she didn't realize Garcia was being arrested when she approached the median where the deputies were talking to the woman. Footage of her arrest went viral, with an overwhelming number of commentators condemning the deputies for what seemed like punishment against Olsen for doing a good deed. The Lee County Sheriff's Office addressed the widely circulated footage in a Facebook post, clarifying the reasons for Olsen's arrest and standing by their decision to criminally charge her. 15. Richard Jones. In 1999, a 25-year-old Missouri man named Richard Jones was wrongfully convicted of an aggravated robbery in Kansas after eyewitnesses identified him from a photo lineup. There were no fingerprints or other physical evidence tying him to the crime, and he had an alibi. Jones maintained his innocence, but was nevertheless found guilty and handed a 19-year prison sentence. In 2017, eyewitnesses to the case were shown a side-by-side image of Jones and another suspect, who bear a striking resemblance to one another at quick glance. The witnesses said they couldn't tell the two men apart well enough to confidently identify the culprit, and the evidence now seemed to point more strongly at the doppelganger, known only as Ricky. Jones's conviction was overturned. At the age of 42, and after missing the opportunity to see his kids grow up, he was sent back into the free world. Jones sued for his wrongful imprisonment and received a $1 million settlement. But his life took a turn down the wrong path in May 2019 when he was arrested on federal drug and gun charges. This time, his guilt was a lot less questionable. According to authorities, Jones ran from police who were responding to a domestic incident he was involved in. He managed to get away, but officers noticed he had a gun in his waistband. When police tried pulling him over a week later, he fled the scene, resulting in a high-speed chase that ended when he lost control of the vehicle and crashed. Jones pleaded guilty to one count of being a felon in possession of a firearm. He was facing a sentence of up to 10 years, but the outcome of the case is unclear. 14. David Levan. During what began as a routine traffic stop in 2012, Maryland resident David Levan was told that he was wanted on a federal warrant for forgery and counterfeiting. He knew that he had not committed these crimes, but the officer who pulled him over had limited information available to share with him. There also wasn't enough information for the officer to detain Levan, so the officer advised him to contact the Secret Service for the answers he was looking for. Unfortunately, all the agency did was confirm that the warrant in Levan's name existed. Around the same time, Levan and his family took a road trip to Canada. Getting into Canada was no problem, but on the way back into the US, Levan's vehicle was surrounded by officers with their guns drawn. In addition to the emotional shock of dealing with a situation like that, the family was detained for 2.5 hours before they were allowed to proceed onward. At this point, David had a pretty clear idea that he was being mistaken for someone else with the same name. He contacted WBAL-TV's I-Team group of investigative journalists and asked for help getting to the bottom of the situation. The findings revealed that Levan was probably being mistaken for a Russian national who was wanted in connection with a counterfeiting scheme. In addition to having the same name, the two men share a birth date, which helps to explain why Levan had such a hard time convincing law enforcement at the border that he wasn't the fugitive. Determined to clear his name, he began contacting elected leaders and asking for their help. Congressman John Sarbanes contacted the Secret Service. Levan soon received a letter from the agency, reassuring him that the system had been updated to reflect that he was the good David Levan and not the subject of the warrant. 13. Bethany Farber. While waiting to board a flight to Mexico at Los Angeles International Airport for a family vacation in 2021, 30-year-old Bethany Farber heard her name being called over the loudspeaker. Transportation Security Administration (TSA) agents took her into an interrogation room, where she sat for hours after being told that she couldn't board her flight because she was a fugitive wanted in Texas. Farber repeatedly insisted that she had never even been to Texas and urged the agents to cross-check their records to make sure they weren't making a mistake, but her claims fell on deaf ears. Officers from the Los Angeles Police Department (LAPD) retrieved her from the airport and took her to jail, where she remained for the next 2 weeks until the authorities realized they had the wrong Bethany Farber. She sued the LAPD for failing to verify her identity and wrongful arrest and detainment. A side-by-side comparison of Farber and the wanted woman she shared a name with showed that the two women looked nothing alike, suggesting that the mistake may have been discovered much sooner if more was done to ensure that the correct person was in custody. Farber told National Public Radio that the ordeal has left her plagued by anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. She also believes that her arrest triggered the death of her grandmother, who had a stroke after hearing the distressing news. 12. Joshua Sprak. When 46-year-old Joshua Sprak fell asleep while waiting for a meal outside a homeless shelter in Honolulu in 2017, he had no idea that he would wake up to a living nightmare that would cost him years of his life. A passing officer mistook him for a man named Thomas Castleberry, who was wanted for a probation violation stemming from a 2006 drug case. Police had mistaken Sprak for Castleberry at least twice before, but they refused to listen this time when he insisted they had the wrong man, and they ended up in a state mental hospital under Castleberry's name, where he remained for the next 2 years. During his time there, Sprak tried convincing doctors and other staff members that he had fallen victim to a case of mistaken identity. He was written off as delusional and forcibly medicated under a court order to the point of becoming catatonic. Even Sprak's lawyers didn't believe his claims of an identity mix-up at first, leaving him hopelessly trapped in a place where he was completely defenseless against the system that had failed him. But the attorneys eventually got on board with his innocence and began fighting to clear his name. Sprak was finally released in 2020, but little else has been done to make up for the needless suffering he endured. Even after he was freed, Hawaii's criminal database continued to identify him as Thomas Castleberry, making him fearful of ever returning to the island. He reconnected with his family and moved to Connecticut, where he lives with his sister. In late 2022, he filed a lawsuit against multiple defendants, including the police and several state hospital workers, in hopes of righting some of the unspeakable wrongs that were committed against him during his time in custody. To this day, it isn't fully clear what caused the repeated mix-ups between Sprak and Castleberry, but their records intertwined at some point, and he's been trying to clear up the confusion ever since. 11. Elias Fishburn IV. After crashing his BMW into a guardrail in Cheverly, Maryland, on his way to the gym one morning in 2005, Elias Fishburn IV was thankful to be okay, despite the sad state of his car. As he scrambled to figure out how he'd get his errands done without a car, a Maryland state trooper approached the scene. Fishburn handed his license and registration to the trooper as requested, and was confused when he returned from his patrol car and put him under arrest. As he sat in the back of a police cruiser without the faintest clue why he was being detained, he overheard the troopers talking about how he was wanted on a warrant out of Atlanta. He maintained his innocence throughout the entire arrest and booking process, as the arresting officers repeatedly called him Jarvis Tucker. Realizing he was the victim of some sort of mix-up, Fishburn continued trying to convince the police that he wasn't who they thought he was. He later told the Washington Post that his protests fell on deaf ears. His name was listed as one of Jarvis Tucker's known alibis, and law enforcement seemed convinced that he was Tucker, despite the men having birth dates that are years apart and other differences that could have been identified based on Tucker's case file alone. The men's heights, weights, and facial features were noticeably different enough to make it clear that they were two different people. Speaking with The Post, Fishburn said he overheard a black booking officer expressing doubt that he was the wanted fugitive. A white officer dismissed the suggestion, but Fishburn remained hopeful that once the jail took his fingerprints, they would realize he didn't belong in custody. As more time passed without the discovery made, he became increasingly worried. He was pressured into signing paperwork acknowledging charges for cocaine trafficking, receiving stolen property, and a gun-related count. Fishburn had never been in trouble with the law before. Unsure of what to do, he waived extradition to Georgia, only to realize that it was the exact opposite of what he should have done. In hindsight, he told The Post that he had naively believed that the error would be discovered and that the system was self-correcting. 36 hours after arriving in Atlanta, jail staff noticed the glaring discrepancies between Fishburn and Tucker. He was finally released, but the experience had a damaging impact on his mental health, and he was left with a record for charges that showed up in a background check as a case that the authorities declined to prosecute, rather than having his name cleared entirely. 10. Sher Meyer. A Utah woman named Sher Meyer was staying at a hotel in West Jordan, Utah in September 2023 when police showed up outside her room at 4 o'clock in the morning and knocked until she woke up and came to the door. Law enforcement had received a noise complaint about two people arguing and possibly a baby crying. But they were knocking on the wrong door and the ensuing confusion was about to get ugly. Meyer was naked from the waist down when she answered the door. To avoid exposing herself, she cracked the door open wide enough to talk to the officers and allow them a glimpse into the room. But the police allegedly insisted that the woman step out into the hallway while they inspect the room themselves, according to a lawsuit filed by Meyer in 2023. The complaint also accuses the cops of refusing to let Meyer close the door and barging into the room when she told them they weren't allowed in without a warrant. Meyer claimed that the officers pinned her to the bed, handcuffed her, and forced her outside while she was still undressed. She was placed in a restraint device called a wrap bodysuit, which she says made her pass out several times, and was charged with multiple felonies and misdemeanors. The charges were dropped after the district attorney's office reviewed body cam footage from Meyer's arrest, but she remains unsatisfied by authorities' response, or lack thereof, to the case. Meyer's lawyer told ABC4 that she initially tried to resolve the situation by reaching out to the city directly. She wanted an apology, discipline against the officers involved in the incident, and compensation. But her lawyer claimed that the city didn't respond to the request, leaving her feeling like she had no choice but to take the case to court in order to be heard. 9. Robinson Santos. After becoming a permanent resident of the United States in 2012, Robinson Santos went to an immigration office in New York City to pick up his new ID card. While there, he popped up in the computer system as someone who was wanted for an assault in Enfield, Connecticut. As it turned out, the warrant was for a wanted fugitive named Robinson Santos Colon, and the two men share a birth date. After being alerted to the warrant, immigration agents sent Robinson's photo to the Enfield police, who clarified that he was not the wanted man. During another visit to an immigration office 2 years later, in February 2014, Robinson once again appeared in the system as a wanted individual in connection with the assault case that Colon was the prime suspect in. This time, however, Enfield police allegedly confirmed that immigration had the right person in custody without referencing a photo. Santos was held in jail for 3 weeks while awaiting extradition to Connecticut before the mix-up was finally noticed. He sued the city of Enfield for his wrongful detention and was offered a $25,000 settlement in lieu of taking the case to trial. It's unclear whether Santos accepted the offer. Town attorney Kevin Deneen said that 2 separate investigations had ruled that law enforcement acted appropriately by detaining Santos due to the serious nature of the charge. But a trial would be much more expensive than trying to settle agreeably, hence the $25,000 offer, which Deneen described as a business decision rather than an admission of guilt. 8. Errol Leith. South Florida resident Errol Leith can't drive due to his epilepsy, so he relies on public transportation. He was going about his normal day in July of 2023 when he stepped off the bus and was greeted by a fugitive task force with guns drawn. The officers ordered him to the ground and physically subdued him, while he asked what was going on and repeatedly informed them of his seizure disorder. According to local station WSBN, Leith had never been in trouble with the law. He struggles with reading and speaking properly, but is an avid fan of the Bible and almost always has it with him. Simply put, he's not the type of person that a fugitive task team would be looking for, which is why he was so confused when the police ambushed him on that hot summer day. After asking Leith for his name, the officers realized they had the wrong person. When one of the cops told Leith that they were looking for a fugitive who was wanted for murder, he was shocked. He said that he'd never done anything like that in his life. The officer explained that the wanted man could have passed for Leith's twin and encouraged him to calm down. But that's easier said than done when you're being physically restrained by a group of cops and you have no idea why. Leith was released, and the Fort Lauderdale Police Department apologized for the mix-up. But the incident had lasting effects on him, especially since anxiety and stress tend to trigger his seizures. And while the police seemed to think that Leith was a spitting image of the fugitive they confused him with, Dana King, Errol told 7 News Miami that he doesn't see the resemblance at all. 7. James King. 21-year-old James King was walking to his job in Grand Rapids, Michigan one afternoon in July 2014 when he crossed paths with a local policeman and an FBI agent in plainclothes. He was unaware that the scruffy, casually dressed men were law enforcement, or that they were searching for a wanted fugitive named Aaron Davison, who was the prime suspect in a recent home invasion. At the same time, the plainclothes cops decided that King might match the suspect's description, although they had only vague details and an old photo to rely on when it came to identifying Davison. When they confronted King, he thought he was being mugged. In reality, the undercovers were arresting him for not having his ID and for allegedly refusing to answer their questions. King became even more certain he was being robbed when one of the detectives reached into his pants and took his wallet. He attempted to flee on foot, but took just a few steps before being taken to the ground and repeatedly punched in the face. Dashcam footage captured audio of King explaining in a terrified voice that he thought the men were robbing him. Several onlookers called 911 as the young man screamed out for help, and a police officer reportedly ordered the bystanders to delete their cell phone footage of the incident. Authorities charged King with assault with intent to commit great bodily harm, resisting arrest, and aggravated assault on a police officer. He spent several days in jail before bonding out, and he and his family spent all the money they had on his legal defense. Feeling like he'd been given an unfair shake by the criminal justice system, King filed a lawsuit in 2016 accusing the police of excessive force, malicious prosecution, and unlawful search and seizure. At the center of the case was the debate over whether government employees deserve something known as qualified immunity, which protects them from lawsuits accusing them of violating a plaintiff's rights. This makes it extremely difficult to pursue justice against government officials, as King learned when his case repeatedly came out on the losing end in court. As of 2023, the lawsuit had bounced around between several courts, including the US Supreme Court, and King is still fighting to get qualified immunity overturned. 6. Leonardo Silva Oliveira. In early 2022, police in Coconut Creek, Florida, arrested a man they believed was wanted for a probation violation in connection with a burglary and grand theft case dating back to 2017. They got the man's name right, but they targeted the wrong person entirely. As it turned out, 26-year-old Leonardo Silva Oliveira shares a name with the fugitive, who was wanted in Palm Beach County. Both men are the same age, and according to law enforcement, they share some similar physical characteristics. The wrongfully arrested Oliveira was arrested at his workplace and spent 5 days in the Broward County Jail before finally someone ran his fingerprints and realized he didn't belong there. But it shouldn't have required a fingerprint check for police to realize this, according to Oliveira, who pointed out to the South Florida Sun-Sentinel that the fugitive has tattoos that he doesn't have, and their birthdays are 10 days apart. He even claimed that a staff member checked his arms and realized he had no tattoos, but continued with the booking process anyway. A Coconut Creek police spokesperson told People magazine that the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office had contacted the agency about the warrant. The representative claimed that the name, social security number, birth date, and other personal information of the man they arrested matched the details they received from the PBSO. He also said that a deputy had confirmed that they had arrested the right man based on a photo of the arrestee. When the story broke, the Oliveira who was mistaken for the fugitive had hired some attorneys with the goal of ensuring that those involved in the mix-up were held accountable. It's unclear whether the young man's objectives were met. 5. Hamdi Muhammad. As a child, Hamdi Muhammad migrated to the United States from Somalia with her family and settled down in Minneapolis in search of a better life. She instead found herself on the losing end of a horrific case of injustice that was built almost entirely on lies and corruption. In 2011, the high schooler and two of her friends ran into a former roommate of one of the girls named Muna. There were past tensions, and a verbal disagreement between the parties escalated into physical violence when Muna allegedly pulled a knife on the girls. Hamdi and her friends called the police, while Muna fled the scene. As the victims provided their statements to a responding officer, Muna called Minneapolis police officer Heather Waker, who she'd been working for as a confidential informant and the star witness of a human trafficking case. According to news reports, Waker called the officer who was taking the girls' complaints against Muna and persuaded him that they were the real culprits. Accused of intimidating a witness, the trio were placed in cop cars and hauled off to jail on false charges. Waker proceeded to file a federal criminal complaint against the girls, filled with allegations that they claim are absurd and patently false. Hamdi languished behind bars for 2 years due to the bogus charges, which were eventually dropped when Waker was outed as a habitual liar who built the so-called case of her career on exaggerated and false information. In addition to the injustices against Hamdi and her friends, as many as 30 Somali refugees were jailed as a result of Waker's human trafficking case, many of whom are believed to be innocent. More than 20 people have sued Waker, including Hamdi, but almost all of them have failed to secure a court victory due to the overly generous protections that are afforded to government employees who are accused of violating people's rights. As of 2022, Waker was still working as a police officer. Many people are now fighting to change the protections that are afforded to government employees in civil lawsuits, but there's a long way to go before the playing field is anywhere close to even. 4. Dre Mason. 42-year-old mother of 4 Dre Mason was sitting on the front steps of her Manhattan apartment building while waiting for her boyfriend to visit one evening in 1994 when she was approached by 2 men she'd never met before. Claiming to be bounty hunters, the strangers accused her of being a fugitive from Alabama named Audrey White Smith, who was wanted for jumping bail in Tuscaloosa on a theft case. It's unclear exactly how the men mistakenly identified Mason as White, other than based on a tip they'd received that White might be in the area. In a place as populated as New York City, this information alone is rarely enough to narrow the suspect pool down to one person. But the bounty hunters were convinced that they had the right person, even though the women had noticeable physical differences and had no connections with one another whatsoever. Mason insisted through tears that she was innocent, as the man slapped handcuffs on her and took her to jail. A pair of bail bondsmen traveled from Alabama to New York to retrieve the woman, and the men who arrested Mason received a $4,000 check for turning her over. Shortly after she arrived in Alabama, the identity mix-up became evident. She was released from jail and put on a bus back to New York, where she filed lawsuits against several of the parties involved in her false arrest. Mason received civil settlements totaling over $1.15 million. Bail bondsman Victor Melendez, who owned the Bronx-based company that the 2 bounty hunters worked for, pleaded guilty to false imprisonment and was sentenced to 5 years of probation. 3. James Tully. Pennsylvania resident James Tully wasn't one to complain, even when he found himself walking 5 miles to his factory job and back every day because he didn't own a car. It was just what he had to do to support his family, so he did it. But the 39-year-old's life became a lot more complicated in 2014 when police began stopping him constantly on his way to and from work because they thought he resembled a wanted cop killer named Eric Frein. A close look at the two men is all it takes to realize that they're definitely not the same person. But they must have bore some similarities at first glance, considering how it had become almost an everyday thing for Tully to be confronted by law enforcement. Eric Frein was wanted for gunning down State Trooper Corporal Brian K. Dixon II outside a barracks in the Pocono Mountains in September 2014. He remained at large for over a month and a half after the crime, while the Pocono region landed at the center of a massive manhunt, causing local residents' lives to ground to a screeching halt. School, hunting season, and Halloween festivities were all cancelled, as entire communities were encouraged to lock their doors and keep an eye out for Frein. And as they sat inside, waiting to resume their normal lives, residents were plagued by the unnerving sounds of low-flying helicopters that now seemed to circle over the area on a routine basis. In late October of that year, about a week before Frein's capture, Tully told CNN that he stopped counting after the first 20 encounters he had with police over their suspicion that he might be the accused cop killer. After a certain point, he realized that as long as the hunt for Frein went on, he would continue to be mistaken for the fugitive. He started wearing his work badge around his neck while he was walking, but it's probably safe to assume that this had a limited effect on reducing the seemingly constant identity mix-ups. After hearing about Tully's newfound struggle during what was once a peaceful walk to work, people began helping him out with rides. One resident, Dawn DeBais, went the extra mile and started a fundraiser to help Tully buy a car. The crowdfunding campaign reached over $22,000 in 5 days before being closed out at Tully's request. It was plenty enough to get him a decent set of wheels. He didn't want to be greedy and was extremely thankful to the community for their help. 2. Erin Peters. A 35-year-old mother and breast cancer patient named Erin Peters was shopping at an Idaho Walmart in 2016 when she was briefly detained on suspicion of being an 18-year-old wanted woman named Whitley Evanson. Members of the North Idaho Violent Crimes Task Force questioned her for 45 minutes before feeling satisfied that she was telling the truth and letting her go. Whitley Evanson was wanted on a murder charge, which ended in an involuntary manslaughter conviction and a probation sentence. When Erin landed in the hot seat before the young woman's capture, she felt terrified and humiliated. She later told CBS News that the task force members rifled through her belongings, including her purse and phone, as well as her intellectual property, including her Facebook account. Erin felt that law enforcement handled the situation improperly. FBI spokesman Richard Collotti apologized for the inconvenience but defended the task force's actions, stating that criminals often come up with creative excuses to avoid arrest and that the team had to be sure that Erin wasn't the fugitive. Collotti said he was confident that Erin was treated with professionalism. At the same time, it's understandable that the woman was left in tears by the incident and felt terrible about the position she'd just been put in. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Clarence Evans. 39-year-old Clarence Evans was spending time with his wife and kids outside his Houston, Texas home in 2019 when Harris County Deputy Garrett Lindley pulled up and asked him about his dog. Evans was breeding his dog at the time, so it seemed like a normal question. But the conversation took a weird turn when the deputy allegedly told him the pet was stolen. Knowing his dog was inside his house, Evans said that was impossible. Sensing that something might go wrong, Clarence's wife began recording the interaction on her cell phone. Evans later told ABC News that Lindley asked his name and grabbed his arm before saying something to the effect of, "Actually, I already know you. You have a warrant out of Louisiana." In the cell phone video, the deputy could be heard calling Clarence Quentin at least once. Both Evans and his wife clarified that his name wasn't Quentin and that he had no connections with anything going on in Louisiana. A second deputy who arrived at the scene showed Evans a photo of the wanted fugitive that they believed was him, and allegedly said, "Doesn't that look a lot like you?" As far as Evans could tell, the only things he and the man in the photo had in common were the fact that they were both African-American men with a similar skin tone and dreadlocks. But the similarities ended there, according to Evans, who said the fugitive, Quentin Prejean, looked a lot older than him. One of the deputies realized that the two men were separate people, and the interaction ended there. The police left the scene, and Evans was free to carry on with his day. But this did not fix or make up for the mistreatment he felt he'd received. He filed a lawsuit, accusing the deputies of violating his civil rights, while police officials accused Evans of being uncooperative and argued that the deputies were just doing their jobs. It appears as though Evans lost the lawsuit, and it's probably safe to assume that no disciplinary action was taken within the sheriff's office. 8. Maria del Carmen Renan. Viral TikTok footage that circulated in 2021 shows a police officer threatening to smash the window of a woman's SUV in Wake Forest, North Carolina. In the video, the officer can be heard warning 35-year-old Maria del Carmen Renan to get out of the car and counting down from 5. When he got to 1 and she was still in the vehicle, he shattered the window with his baton and arrested her. Based on the TikTok clip alone, it seemed to many like a classic case of an officer acting needlessly aggressive toward a motorist during a traffic stop. But the Wake Forest Police Department said that the video didn't tell the whole story. According to the agency's version of events, officers first encountered Renan at the scene of a suspected felony assault between two teens. During the investigation, she became uncooperative and fled the scene with the assault suspect and 3 others. While driving, she nearly hit an officer, ran a stop sign, and almost collided with a tractor-trailer. Describing the situation as entirely avoidable, Wake Forest Police Chief Jeff Leonard said that officers were forced to react to Renan's reckless behavior and her refusal to exit the vehicle. He accused her of endangering the lives of her passengers and other drivers and resisting the police at every turn. Renan was charged with resisting arrest, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, driving with a revoked license, and careless and reckless driving. 7. Karen Garner. In June of 2020, Walmart employees in Loveland, Colorado saw an elderly woman leave the store without paying for her merchandise. They confronted 73-year-old Karen Garner and found $14 worth of unpaid items in her possession, including a t-shirt, candy, and soda. The workers refused to let the senior citizen pay for the goods and took the items back, then called the police. Garner suffers from dementia and a sensory aphasia, which affects a person's language comprehension. While responding to the call from Walmart, Officer Austin Hopp found her picking wildflowers on the side of the road. In a body cam video of the encounter, Hopp can be heard telling Garner to stop as he approaches her on foot. She looked back at him with a confused expression, then continued to walk while clutching her freshly picked wildflowers. Almost immediately, Hopp grabbed Garner's arms from behind, then took the 80-pound woman to the ground and handcuffed her. Karen cried out with a terrified expression on her face and repeatedly said that she was going home and didn't do anything. Hopp and another officer, Daria Jalali, hogtied the elderly woman and forced her into a squad car. A bystander questioned their aggressive behavior and was told to go away and that the situation was none of their business. A police station surveillance camera later captured Hopp, Jalali, and Officer Tyler Blackett laughing and fist-bumping each other while reviewing body cam footage of the arrest. Hopp can be heard describing Garner as senile and admitting that he dislocated her shoulder and failed to administer her Miranda rights. All 3 officers resigned when the case fell under public scrutiny. Hopp was sentenced to 5 years in prison for assault after taking a plea deal, and Jalali received a 45-day jail sentence for misconduct and failing to intervene on or report the use of excessive force. Garner was left with lasting physical damage, including limited use of her left arm. Her family sued the city and the officers involved on her behalf for using excessive force and failing to provide medical care, and received a $3 million settlement. 6. Robert Cortez. In a bid to strengthen its relationship with the community, the Los Angeles Police Department sponsored a movie night in Harbor City Park during the summer of 2022. But the event failed to live up to its purpose when footage of officers forcefully arresting a young man went viral on social media. A 19-year-old volunteer named Robert Cortez was setting up chairs for moviegoers when he saw officers detaining his friend on suspicion of having a gun. He started recording the arrest on his phone and was rushed by an officer, who later told the young man's mother that he thought the object in Robert's hand might be a gun. A lengthy struggle ensued as the scene erupted into chaos. Footage captured by Robert's mother, Rocio Gonzalez, shows the officer and Cortez entangled in a physical struggle before he's ultimately slammed to the ground and taken into custody. During the video, Gonzalez can be heard asking officers why her son was detained. She then pleaded with Robert to calm down and stop resisting the officer, who was attempting to subdue the teen. As the footage shows, Cortez repeatedly asked why he was being detained but received no answer. Although Gonzalez encouraged her son to comply with the police, she and many others disapproved of the officer's reaction to Cortez filming his friend's arrest. No guns were found on the young men, but Robert was charged with resisting arrest. The LAPD launched a use of force investigation. In the meantime, Gonzalez called for better de-escalation training for police officers. 5. Candy Alicon. Small business owner Sophia Romo was about to head home from her adult boutique in Houston one day in 2022 when an employee told her there was a thief in the store. She reviewed surveillance footage and saw a woman stuffing merchandise into her purse. When the employee told Romo that the woman refused to give the items back, she took the situation into her own hands. Romo followed the sticky-fingered shopper onto a public bus, where she filmed herself confronting the suspect. The woman, later identified as Candy Alicon, agreed to pay for the stolen goods when the bus got to her house. In the meantime, Romo went through her purse and found around $600 worth of merchandise, along with the device for removing security tags. She proceeded to follow Alicon on foot and called the police. The video ends with Houston police handcuffing the suspect, who was charged with theft. After posting the footage, Romo said that other business owners reached out to her and said they also had issues with Alicon, who was on probation for a previous theft charge at the time of her arrest. Romo admitted that her unconventional way of addressing the situation was dangerous and that it could have quickly turned bad. But she was fed up with an ongoing theft problem at her store and decided to make an example out of Alicon in hopes of discouraging others from stealing. 4. Randall Worcester. One morning in August of 2022, Crawford County, Arkansas deputies Zach King and Levy White and Mulberry police officer Tel Riddle arrested 27-year-old Randall Worcester for allegedly threatening a convenience store employee. They didn't seem to notice that a bystander was recording them on her phone as they held the man to the ground and brutally beat him. In the 34-second clip, which appeared on social media later that day, one policewoman can be seen slamming Worcester's face into the pavement and punching him in the head multiple times, while another officer kneed him in the side and back. In the meantime, it appears as though Worcester is trying to shield himself from the beatdown. At some point, a woman shouts to the officers to stop beating him and says that he needs his medicine. After noticing that the incident was being captured on camera, an officer orders the person to stop filming and the video ends. The lawmen claim that before the filming began, Worcester body slammed a deputy and bit and spat on them as they tried to take him into custody. They charged him with a slew of crimes including battery, assault, resisting arrest, criminal trespass, criminal mischief, terroristic threatening, and more. But even in cases where a suspect is being non-compliant or dangerous, it's not customary for police to strike someone in the head repeatedly as a way to get them under control. Numerous experts said that the use of force in the video seems excessive, and that the officers don't appear to be using accepted techniques for handcuffing a suspect. Shortly after the disturbing footage emerged, deputies King and White were suspended from their jobs, and Officer Riddle was also put on leave from his position with the Mulberry Police Department. The incident is being investigated by the Arkansas State Police. Worcester bonded out of jail and filed a federal lawsuit against the agencies and individuals involved in the horrifying assault. His lawyers maintain that their client was cooperative with the officers. According to Worcester's version of events, he immediately handed over a small pocket knife when they asked if he had any weapons, and was unarmed when an officer suddenly tried to handcuff him behind his back. The lawsuit alleges that the officer failed to give him a reason for why he was being handcuffed and that nobody administered his Miranda rights. The complaint also criticizes the officers for beating Worcester without first trying to subdue him with pepper spray or with a taser. 3. Angel Guiche. In response to a spike in homicides in 2022, Atlanta police stepped up their patrol of the city's parks. An officer encountered 34-year-old Angel Guiche and another individual at Shady Valley Park during after hours. He attempted to issue citations to the pair for being there past the 11 p.m. closing time. Footage that appeared on social media and sparked widespread outrage shows the officer telling Guiche that she would be arrested if she refused to sign the citation. During the exchange, Guiche asked the officer for his name and badge number, which he provided. The confrontation ended with police forcefully taking the woman into custody after telling her repeatedly to put her hands behind her back. In response to the viral video, the Atlanta Police Department released full body cam footage of the interaction between Guiche and the officer. The agency claimed that Guiche refused to sign the citation, which is considered reasonable cause for arrest, and accused her of needlessly escalating the situation. Angel's lawyer Lee Merritt told local station WGCL that his client did not refuse to sign the citation, but that she simply asked for more information, which the officer refused to provide. Merritt blamed the officer for the situation becoming physical, alleging that he quickly became agitated and resorted to the use of force. Guiche spent the night in jail and was left traumatized by the ordeal, according to Merritt, who's challenging the APD in court with allegations of excessive use of force. The matter is ongoing. 2. Justified force. Hundreds of Purdue students protested in early 2022 when footage of an arrest on the university's campus in Indiana went viral. The video shows an officer on top of a student with his arm near the man's neck, while the suspect repeatedly yells, "You're choking me." A bystander can be heard telling the officer to remove his elbow. The officer was put on leave while authorities investigated the incident. Madison County prosecutor Rodney J. Cummings oversaw the case and was tasked with deciding whether to criminally charge either party involved in the case. In his findings, he revealed that police reported to the scene after receiving a call about a man refusing to let a woman drive away in her vehicle. Responding officers found the suspect standing outside his girlfriend's vehicle. He told them that his girlfriend was acting crazy, but was found to have her phone and wallet in his possession. The man allegedly refused to comply with repeated orders to step away from the vehicle and resisted the officer's attempt to handcuff him. He continued to fight and was ultimately taken to the ground. According to the report, the girlfriend started recording the viral video after the suspect was restrained, failing to show what led up to the officer's decision to pin the man down. Cummings ruled that the use of force was reasonable, and that the student's claim that he acted in self-defense was unjustified. He acknowledged that there are times when police abuse their power, but said that the incident was not an example of it, and that the public's response to the situation was disappointing. 1. Antoine Sims. Police in Kennesaw, Georgia, responded to an unusual report in August of 2022 when a man called 911 over his dissatisfaction with his McDonald's order. They arrived at the restaurant to find 24-year-old Antoine Sims accusing the manager of serving cold fries, handling food without gloves, and failing to give him a receipt. Prior to the officer's arrival, the argument had erupted into a shouting match. Body cam footage captured an officer's conversation with Sims, who described his fries as lukewarm but not hot. He claimed that the manager got confrontational and told him to leave the property when he requested fresh fries and asked for a receipt for the second time. The manager accused Sims of being aggressive and refusing to leave the property and wanted him removed for trespassing. At the manager's request, the officer issued Sims a criminal trespass notice, which does not come with criminal charges. Just when it seemed like the situation was almost resolved, the police ran the disgruntled customer's ID and discovered a warrant for murder dating back to 2018, something that law enforcement had somehow missed until then, even though Sims had been arrested since the murder and was wearing an ankle monitor. He led the officers on a 20-minute foot chase before being apprehended and taken to the Cobb County Jail, where he awaits the next step in his case. Thanks for watching. Would you rather routinely deal with police problems due to having a doppelganger who's a habitual criminal, or have a misdemeanor show up on your record because someone faked your identity during their arrest? Let us know in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.